Hello. Don't forget to like and subscribe before starting the video. Who is James A. Garfield? James A. Garfield was the 20th President of the United States, serving from March 4, 1881, until his untimely death on September 19, 1881. He was born on November 19, 1831, in Orange Township, Ohio, and grew up in poverty. However, he was a brilliant student and worked hard to earn an education. He eventually became a professor and college president before entering politics. Garfield was a member of the Republican Party and served in the Ohio State Senate before being elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. In 1880, he was unexpectedly nominated as the Republican candidate for president, running on a platform of civil service reform and protectionist tariffs. He won the election, narrowly defeating Democratic candidate Winfield Scott Hancock. Unfortunately, Garfield's presidency was short-lived. On July 2, 1881, he was shot by Charles Guiteau, a disgruntled office-seeker who believed that Garfield had promised him a government position. Garfield was seriously wounded and spent the next 80 days fighting for his life. Despite the best efforts of his doctors, he eventually succumbed to his injuries and died on September 19, 1881. Garfield's assassination had a significant impact on American history. It led to increased public support for civil service reform and raised awareness about the dangers of political violence. Garfield is also remembered for his commitment to education and his efforts to promote African American rights during his brief time in office. James A. Garfield was born into poverty in Orange Township, Ohio, on November 19, 1831. His father died when he was young, and he was raised by his mother and older brother. Despite their financial struggles, Garfield was a gifted student and had a passion for education. He attended local schools and eventually enrolled in the Western Reserve Eclectic Institute, later known as Hiram College, where he worked as a janitor to pay his tuition. Garfield excelled in his studies at the institute and became a teacher there after graduating. He later went on to study at Williams College in Massachusetts, where he continued to excel academically. He returned to Hiram College in 1857, where he became a professor of ancient languages and eventually rose to the position of college president. In addition to his academic career, Garfield became involved in politics. He was elected to the Ohio State Senate in 1859, where he served for 2 years. During the Civil War, he volunteered for the Union Army and eventually rose to the rank of brigadier general. He was later elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 1862 and served in that position for nearly 18 years. As a congressman, Garfield was known for his support of civil rights for African Americans and his opposition to the expansion of slavery. He was also a strong advocate for the education of freed slaves and helped to establish schools in the South after the Civil War. He was a skilled orator and was highly respected by his colleagues in Congress. Garfield's early life and career demonstrate his strong commitment to education and his passion for public service. Despite his humble beginnings, he worked hard to earn an education and became a respected leader in both academia and politics. His dedication to civil rights and education would continue to be a hallmark of his career, even during his brief tenure as president. The presidential election of 1880 was a significant moment in James A. Garfield's career. Garfield was initially not considered a serious contender for the Republican nomination, as there were several other prominent candidates in the running. However, at the Republican National Convention in Chicago, a deadlock occurred as none of the leading candidates were able to secure enough votes to win the nomination. Garfield, who was serving as a delegate for his home state of Ohio, was seen as a compromise candidate and eventually won the nomination on the 36th ballot. Garfield's campaign for the presidency focused on two main issues: civil service reform and protectionist tariffs. He believed that the spoils system, in which government jobs were awarded to political supporters, was corrupt and inefficient. He advocated for a merit-based system in which government positions would be awarded based on qualifications rather than political connections. In addition, Garfield supported protectionist tariffs, which were intended to protect American industries from foreign competition. He argued that these tariffs would benefit American workers and businesses and help to stimulate the economy. Garfield faced a formidable opponent in the general election, Democratic candidate Winfield Scott Hancock. Hancock was a highly respected Civil War veteran and had a strong base of support among Democrats. However, Garfield's campaign was able to successfully appeal to voters by emphasizing his military service, his commitment to civil service reform, and his advocacy for tariffs. In the end, Garfield won a narrow victory over Hancock, with just over 48% of the popular vote. His victory was aided by strong support from Republican voters in the Northeast and Midwest, as well as by the support of African American voters in the South. Despite the narrow margin of victory, Garfield's election was seen as a significant triumph for the Republican Party and for his vision of civil service reform and protectionist tariffs. James A. Garfield's presidency was short-lived, lasting only 200 days before he was assassinated. However, in that time, he accomplished several significant achievements. One of his most notable accomplishments was his efforts to reform the civil service system. Garfield believed that government jobs should be awarded based on merit rather than political connections. He established a commission to investigate and reform the civil service system, and his efforts laid the foundation for the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act of 1883. Garfield was also a strong advocate for civil rights, particularly for African Americans. He appointed several African Americans to government positions, including Frederick Douglass as the U.S. Marshal for the District of Columbia. He also supported efforts to enforce civil rights laws and to combat discrimination against African Americans in the South. However, Garfield faced several challenges during his presidency. The Republican Party was deeply divided at the time, with factions vying for power and influence. Some members of his own cabinet were openly hostile to his administration, including Secretary of State James G. Blaine, who had unsuccessfully challenged Garfield for the Republican nomination in 1880. The events leading up to Garfield's assassination began on July 2, 1881, when he was shot by Charles Guiteau, a disgruntled office seeker who believed he was owed a government job. Garfield was hit twice and suffered a serious injury. He underwent several surgeries in an attempt to save his life, but he ultimately died on September 19, 1881. The assassination of Garfield shocked the nation and led to increased calls for civil service reform and gun control laws. Guiteau was tried and convicted for the murder of Garfield and was ultimately hanged for his crime. Despite his short tenure as president, James A. Garfield's legacy continues to be felt in American history. His efforts to reform the civil service system and to support civil rights for African Americans laid the groundwork for future reforms and contributed to the ongoing struggle for equality and justice in American society. James A. Garfield's legacy in American politics and history is characterized by his short but impactful presidency and his contributions to civil service reform and civil rights advocacy. Garfield's untimely death also had a profound impact on American society, particularly in terms of public support for civil service reform. After Garfield's assassination, there was a widespread belief that his death could have been prevented if the civil service system had been reformed earlier. This led to a groundswell of public support for the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act of 1883, which established a merit-based system for hiring and promoting government employees. The Pendleton Act was a significant step towards ending the corrupt and inefficient spoils system and is considered one of Garfield's greatest legacies. Garfield's impact on civil rights is also notable. As a strong advocate for African American rights, Garfield appointed several African Americans to government positions, including Frederick Douglass as the U.S. Marshal for the District of Columbia. He also supported efforts to enforce civil rights laws and combat discrimination against African Americans in the South. In addition to his political legacy, Garfield is also remembered through various memorials and tributes. The most significant of these is the James A. Garfield Memorial in Cleveland, Ohio, which is a towering monument dedicated to his memory. There are also numerous schools, streets, and buildings named after Garfield throughout the United States. Overall, James A. Garfield's legacy is one of political reform and advocacy for civil rights. Despite his short time in office, his impact on American history and society is still felt today. In conclusion, this video has explored the life and legacy of James A. Garfield, the 20th President of the United States. We discussed his early life, career, presidency, and legacy. Garfield was a champion of civil service reform and civil rights, and his legacy is still felt in American politics today. We encourage viewers to learn more about James A. Garfield and his impact on American history. Thank you for watching this video. If you found it informative, please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more content like this in the future.